6 years ago, I walked out of an REI store with my arms full of gear I had no idea how to use. I had a fresh receipt for a water bladder, which the sales guy told me would hold my water for me on my back and give me a little straw to drink it from as I hiked. And I ran home and I overpacked my rented backpack with everything I thought I would need for my first ever backpacking trip, which was going to be a 4-day excursion to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and over to Havasupai Falls, this magical oasis of waterfalls that almost impossibly just pop up out of the desert in this remote corner of the canyon. And they run with this water that is just a perfect crystal blue. And I didn't really know what I was doing as a backpacker, obviously, but I knew in that moment that I really needed this adventure. So I just reminded myself of that as I looked down at my beat up Adidas sneakers and I started down the switchbacks that would take me to this pretty grueling 10-mile hike across the canyon floor and over to my campground. And as I settled into the hike, and I knew it was gonna take a few hours, so I really didn't wanna start thinking about getting hungry or getting tired or getting sore. So I put all my energy behind thinking about like big think topics, like where have you been, Lise? And what have you been through? And what have you learned? And where do you wanna go? And what do you want? And I was like determined to eat, pray, love my way through this hike. So after a bit of hiking, I just said, I want someone who is captivated by me. Just out loud, to the Grand Canyon, nobody around, just said it to a rock. And I don't normally make a habit of talking to rocks, but in that moment, I felt like the universe really needed to hear me say that. Because at that time in my life, I was in the process of leaving an abusive marriage, and I was going through a really terrifying divorce. To be down in the Grand Canyon and be surrounded with these rock walls that were thousands of feet tall, it almost felt like this odd, freeing fortress of some kind. Like on the one hand, I was completely untouchable by and protected from this one person. And on the other hand, I was in this big new world that had suddenly opened for me. And I could say yes, even to that trip. Saying yes was a huge deal. And I could be in a space that was free of chaos and full of peace and gave me the space to actually hear my own thoughts for the first time in years. And I think that those two ingredients together really fueled my spirit of adventure on that trip because I did everything. I hiked across these tiny little footbridges with rushing water under them, and I crawled through these caves to get to these waterfalls, and some of the waterfalls were 100 feet tall, and shimmy down these rickety ladders and use these slippery chains to get to where I needed to be. And I think that's how I found myself on the very last day, standing on a very small ledge overlooking a waterfall, wondering if I should jump. And this waterfall was the first jumpable waterfall we had come to. All the other ones were like certain death. They were way too tall. This one was maybe 20 or 30 feet, but looking over the edge felt a lot taller than that. And as I'm looking at that water underneath my feet and just thinking about my kids and co-pays and deductibles and all the bad things that could happen, I looked to my right for a moment and I locked eyes with this guy, Ron, who was part of the hiking group, and he was waiting for his turn to jump. And when I looked back at the water, I thought, how in the world had I not noticed until now how all-consuming his big brown eyes were? I hadn't noticed them the day before when we were at Beaver Falls, and I was writing all of my life's chaos in my journal, and he leaned over and asked what I was writing. And I didn't notice him the first night. I sat right next to him at a restaurant. But now, on the edge of this waterfall, his eyes seemed to be everything I needed. So my eyes struck up this silent conversation with his eyes and just kept asking them if I should stay or if I should jump. And so I'd look at him, and I'd look at the water, and then I'd look at him, and I'd look at the water. And at some point, he broke the silence and said, the story's better if you jump. And before I could think of anything witty to say, he was standing directly in front of me, facing me on this very small ledge. And he looked down at me and he just said, hi. And I looked up and I was like, hi. And a couple seconds later, he bent his knees and jumped backwards off that ledge into the water. And about a minute or two later, I followed him forward and, off the ledge into the water, and this gigantic physical leap of faith on my part, which turned into this unexpected emotional leap of faith for both of us, because after we hiked out of that canyon, both Ron and I recognized like there was some energy exchanged on the top of that waterfall. And, even though we both had our own things going on, I had my own personal tornado on the sidelines, and I had kids, and he had kids, and he was going through a separation and the whole thing, we decided we needed to know about each other. And so we just dove in and we just continued that conversation that our eyeballs started on the edge of that waterfall. And we formed and built this relationship built on adventure and just going for it. We did everything. We went to races. We took all of our kids hiking through a bunch of national parks. We paddled and kayaked down the Colorado at Horseshoe Bend. And a couple years ago, we found the perfect deserted beach in Kauai, and we got married and made our adventurous life official. And I think the coolest part about the whole experience for me is that right when we started dating, Ron had sent me a text message, and it said something about, "I'm just captivated by you." And it still takes my breath away to this day, because I only told that to the Grand Canyon. Like, no one heard me say that. But I just think that it really supports Ron's theory that the story's better if you jump. And I'm so glad I did. Thank you.